Hi guys, it's time for another ranking my last XX palettes video. Usually I do 10, but today I happen to have 13 because I got more palettes into my collection when I was close to 10 than I was expecting because I bought the Juvia's Place mini bundle which had 4 in it, so I'm just including all of these in this ranking thingy. Now before we jump into this, I just want to make a quick disclaimer and say that these aren't ranked in terms of performance. This is just like how I feel about these palettes. Some might be ranked higher than others just because of the color story alone, even if they are maybe better performing palettes than the others. This is just how I feel about these palettes as they have come into my collection and how I see them in like which ones would I use the most and stuff like that, and which ones do inspire me more, and I don't know, let's just get into this. So let's start off on the bottom. I will show you the pile that we have going on here. So I have a lot of palettes, obviously. This is not the order in which they are ranked. This is just like ordered after the size of them really. So let's start on the bottom in the number 13 spot. And number 13 is going to go to the Juvia's Place, the Nudes palette. I'm sure this is going to come as no surprise to anybody, but this is what the palette looks like. Like I said in my Juvia's Place video, I wasn't planning on picking this up, but if I wanted to get the berries one and the purple one, I had to buy the whole bundle because they were sold out, so this was just part of the bundle. And obviously it's going to end up on the bottom because this is not something that I am ever going to use. Like, this is just not me at all. If anything, I could maybe dip into some of these shimmers, but the mattes are just not for me. So that was a really easy decision for me to put on the bottom. Now let's move into my number 12 spot, which is probably also not going to come as a surprise because this is another one of the Juvia's Place little palettes. This is the chocolates. I mean, this is just yet another neutral palette. I do like this a lot more because it does have a lot more depth to it, but with all of these Juvia's Place palettes, I just don't feel like they're standalone palettes. I feel like the color stories weren't made to be able to just use that palette on its own and create multiple looks with. Like, there really is only so many things you can do with this. Like, you're basically stuck with having the same crease every time you use this. There's not really like an inner corner shade. There's not really like a light shimmer. So for me, all of these palettes are like companion palettes to other things. And like I said, I wouldn't use any of these little palettes on their own if I'm being completely honest here. So for my number 11 palette, this really hurts me because I wanted to like this palette so bad, but this is the Alma palette by Amy Hearts Beauty. This was a collab with Amy Loves Makeup, and this is the color story in it. I did make a video with this palette. I honestly haven't used it since because I just wasn't a fan of the mattes in this palette. Yes, it does have some beautiful shimmers, but for the most part, I found this formula to be just a little bit like dry, I guess, and I don't know, it's like dry and creamy at the same time, but it's also kind of powdery, and it's just a weird formula to work with, and I just didn't really like it. Like, I really wish I liked this more than I did because I'm so happy for Amy, and I wish that I was drawn to this palette in a way where I would want to use it again, but since my first impression just wasn't that good, this happens a lot to me. If I try a palette and I don't like it, odds of me going back to that palette is just very slim because of how many palettes I get into my collection, and the palettes that I choose to do more things with or that I choose to use when I'm not filming is just, those are like my favorite palettes, you know, and I just don't feel like this palette is that for me. So unfortunately, it ended up being pretty low on my list today, but I'm still really happy that I have this palette. I'm really happy that Amy was able to do this collab. If you haven't already checked out Amy's channel, I will have her link down in my description box. She is amazing. I think you would really like her if you have not already like watched her. Like, what are you doing? Next up on my list, I guess we are now on number 10, is going to be another one of the little Juvia's Place palettes, and this is the Berries palette. Again, simply just because I don't consider this to be a standalone palette. I do think that it's a really pretty palette, and I have nothing against this palette. Again, I just wouldn't use it on its own, and that's kind of like how I judge these as like a palette, you know, like I judge it for what it is when I do these rankings. I don't judge it for how else I would use it if I didn't have a channel or something like this, but this is just like, it's a good way for me to be able to sort through things and just have an opinion on them, because if I were to think of all of these palettes as companion palettes, I mean, they would all basically be my favorite because I could pull them in with whatever I wanted, but since that's just not the case with how I run my channel and how I film my videos, I kind of have to see it in this way, and so that is why this palette ended up being so low on my list, but I still can see myself using this a lot along with something else, and I do think it's a beautiful palette. And that is also why the next palette is one of the Juvia's Place little palettes, and this is the Violets. Again, I do feel like this is like the most of a standalone palette than any of the other ones because I feel like there's more depth in the mattes and I feel like there's just more variety and more things that you can do with this palette compared to the other ones in the collection. So that's why this one ended up being like the highest up on my list. I would say as for like colors, I prefer the berries one more, but I find this one to be more versatile. So that's why that ended up being like the top of the 4 of the mini palette. So let's move on. I think we are at number 8 now. So let's see, what is my number 8 palette? This is going to be my number 8 palette. This is a palette that I got in my last Jeffree Star mystery bag, and this is the Thirsty palette. This is what it looks like, simply because I haven't had a chance to really use it. I think the color story is okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I mean, it's definitely a little bit too neutral for my liking, but I can definitely see very fun and colorful and bright and summery looks that I can do with this palette, and I have tried the shimmer and it's stunning, so I would assume that the other ones are really nice too, but it's simply just because I haven't used this more, so I don't really feel like I have an opinion on it, so I can really only judge it based on the color story, so that's why this ended up here. I don't really have anything else to say about it. Next up is going to be a palette that I feel like a lot of you would probably expect me to rank higher. And honestly, when I was going through these and like doing my rankings, I don't even really know what made me rank the other palettes higher than this, because it's not like I don't like this palette. And this is the Makeup a Murder Paint Chips palette. This is the most colorful palette that I got from them. I did get this sent in PR, and I really do like this palette. It's just that it's just a matte rainbow palette. Again, I don't consider an all matte palette to be a standalone palette, so that's kind of just why this ended up here. I mean, I know that when I go to use this, I'm never going to use it on its own without pulling in any shimmers, but I don't know, I just needed a reason to rank this palette, and that's just kind of how this ended up here. I've also not really used it that much, so I don't know exactly how all of these mattes are going to perform. I could tell when I swatched them that they were a little bit on the thinner side, so I don't expect these to be like the most buildable shades, which is another reason why I'm kind of ranking it a little bit lower, even if I haven't used it that much. I know I shouldn't be judging it based on how my swatches were, but that's just kind of like the impression that I got of the formula. But I did use it, and I really like the look that I came up with, and it was very easy to use, but I don't know. I just wasn't really that inspired by that palette. I think I'm just a little bit over like rainbow palettes. It's not that I don't like them, but I just like a little bit more curated color stories these days that don't have like all the options in the world when it comes to like mattes. Like, I like having colorful mattes, but I don't like having all of them like put in front of me, if that makes sense. For my number 6 palette, this is a palette that I got so kindly sent by Alter Ego, and this is the Aurora palette. This is supposed to be a dupe for the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette, and I really enjoy this. I think the color story in here is beautiful. Is it something that I'm going to be reaching for on an everyday basis? Probably not. I need to be in the mood for like only these kind of shades together. But I think the formula is really nice. I really like Alter Ego as a brand, and I think that they come out with some really nice dupes. So yeah, I really like this palette. That's really all I gotta say, and that's why it ended up being so high. I also really enjoy the packaging of all of their palettes. I think that they are really well made, and they feel really expensive, even though they're only like $15. So yeah, I really like this. Next up is another palette that I really like, and I also got this sent in PR. Like, sometimes it's crazy to me to like, when I rank these, to realize how many of the things that I do end up getting in PR, because I mean, it was really just like 6 months ago where I didn't get any PR at all. So to kind of see where I've come in such a short period of time is kind of mind-blowing. So yeah, it's a little bit overwhelming, I guess, but this is the new Lethal Cosmetics palette. I don't actually have the palette in the pans here, but I will pop a picture up on the screen so you can see what it looks like, because I did depot this and I put them into like my empty palettes, because I like to have all of the brand shadows like put together if they are magnetic, especially since this wasn't actually like a palette. It didn't have like names on the palette, like it just had the names on the shadows themselves, because they were single shadows that were just kind of curated into a palette by Lethal. So yeah, I really like that palette. I thought that actually, like, in general, I've just been so impressed by Lethal as a brand. I think that their formula is amazing. I really like the color story. I really liked how the shadows perform, and I didn't have anything to complain about. If you want to see the video that I did with that palette, I will have that linked up in the corner, because I really ended up enjoying that palette. Now, next up is a palette that I've only used like 2 shades in for some reason. See, this is why it's so hard for me to like do these rankings because I have to make sure that I do the rankings before I end up getting more things into my collection. So I don't have the time to actually like sit down and have this be like a ranking review. Like this is just like my thoughts at this very moment about how I feel about these palettes. So like I said in the beginning, this is not a review at all. This is just me trying to rank these with the little information that I do have and the ones that I have tried. So this is one that I got in my Try Beauty box this month. That was a collaboration with Angelica. This is from Glamlite. This is a beautiful palette. This one is called the Miracle palette. Like I said, this is from Glamlite and I really enjoy Glamlite's formula. I think that they have a really, really nice formula and I think that their mattes perform well. I think that their shimmers are beautiful. I also really like the cost for this palette. It was made for like a breast cancer awareness thing and I just think that that is really cool. So yeah, I really enjoy this palette and I am excited to pull this into other videos and just try to get some more use out of this because I think that the color story is just so pretty. It's so romantic. Like imagine the Valentine's Day looks you could make with this. Oh, that would be so beautiful. The shadow here in particular, oh, it's so stunning. And this one, oh, I mean, look at how wet looking those are. Those are beautiful. So I really enjoy this palette. Now, the next palette is a palette that you guys are gonna be like, what the f*** Annette? But this is another one of the Makeup a Murder palettes. I'm sure you guys would have assumed that the two palettes would have been flipped in the rankings, but this is their neutral palette. Ta-da! This is probably the highest up that I will ever rank a neutral palette, but honestly, the shimmer formula in this, you guys, and the black is like one of the best blacks that I've ever tried in my whole entire life. And these shimmers, like, oh, it's just so beautiful. They have little glitter particles in them, and when you get them on the eyes, they sparkle so bright, and they are so shiny. Oh, I just love this palette so much, and I can't even explain to you how much I like this palette. I think it's beautiful. And also, it just wore so well. Sometimes I find with very glittery shades, I get a lot of fallout during the day, or they end up creasing on me, but this lasted throughout the whole day, and it looked beautiful, and it honestly looked more beautiful the more the day went on, because it was almost like the oils on my eyelids kind of made the shimmers and the glitters pop more. I don't know, that sounds really weird, but I just had such a good time with this palette, and I'm excited to have this in my collection as my only neutral palette. Or I guess now I have more because I have those little stupid Juvia's Place palettes, but you know what I mean. This is like my favorite neutral palette in my collection by far out of the very few that I do have. Now for my top two palettes, this is not gonna come as a surprise to anybody, and I almost don't even want to like rank these as number 1 and number 2, so I will just kind of show them to you together. This is the Melt Amor Eterno collection. Both of these palettes are so beautiful. If I had to choose one, I guess I would say that the Vida palette is my number 2, just because of the color story and also because of this Green Got Hard pan, but the quality on these mattes are just incredible, out of this world, so easy to work with, so pigmented. I think the thing with me and Melt is that I definitely prefer their mattes over their shimmers, but since most of these palettes are mattes, I'm not really mad about it. Like this orange shimmer right here is just kind of like, it's nice. I mean, it's pigmented, but it's more like a satin. And like I said, this one right here is just very hard to work with, and right now it's very dry. It's got hard pan. I don't love that, but the mattes totally make up for the shimmers being kind of a dud. And also just like the whole theme of these palettes and the whole skull and just everything about them. This palette is absolutely amazing. I don't like the shade right here. Again, it's like the shimmer thing from Melt. I'm not really that big of a fan, but the mattes are just so good and they're so unique to my collection. And I just love both of these palettes with my whole heart, and I'm so happy I ended up getting both of these. How are you supposed to be put together? Okay, so here we go. So I'm just so happy I ended up picking up both of these. I think that they are so pretty. So happy to have them in my collection. I don't know if these are limited edition, since it was like a special collection for, was it like a, not a holiday, but like a traditional thing? I don't really remember, but I hope that these are not limited edition and that they are going to be permanent in their line, because they are such beautiful palettes, and like I said, just so happy to have them. So let me know if there were any surprises in this ranking. I feel like there were maybe a lot of surprises, especially that neutral palette from Makeup a Murder. I don't know what it is about that palette. I just really, really enjoy it. So that's gonna be it for my ranking my last 13 palettes. I'm sure I will have another one of these coming in the next couple of months, because that's what it's like when you're a palette review channel. You get a lot of palettes. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see some of the other ranking videos that I've done, you can click on one of these. And if you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!